Logical fallacies. So it's just what the name says. It's an error in logic. It's a use of logic that turns out to be false. These are really interesting to study and look into and kind of memorize or remember because they do conform to patterns. And these patterns are seen very often. So let's dive into some of these logical fallacies. Hasty generalization. So a hasty generalization is a conclusion reached too soon, based on not enough evidence. Something like a generalization would need to be based on many perspectives, a lot of evidence for it to be persuasive. So an example of one is as follows. A month ago, I was forced off the highway by a car driven by a high school student who insisted on passing, even though there was not enough room to pass. To avoid being sideswiped, I drove into the ditch. It is obvious to me that teenage drivers are a menace and that the driving age in this state should be raised to 21. So that's a hasty generalization. Based on a single experience, this sweeping conclusion is reached. Stereotype. So we all know what stereotyping is because it happens too commonly. And basically, stereotype is when you're assessing an individual based on the fact that they belong to a group. So you would say, foreigners can't be trusted, and that is a stereotype. So something like this, if it shows up in an argument, and that argument is based on logic, that's a big problem. As with all these logical fallacies, it poses itself as if it's logical, and yet it's not. The cause and effect fallacy. Another name for this is a Latin phrase that I don't know how to pronounce perfectly, but it means after this, therefore because of this. And just because something happens after another thing doesn't mean there's a logical connection between the two. So, an example. The school's basketball team played in the state championship and had to travel a whole day to reach the city where the game would be played. They played the game the same day they traveled and lost badly. Obviously, they lost because they were tired from traveling. Championship games should not be played on the same day that a team travels. So, one thing followed another, and then they've reached a conclusion. There could have been other reasons why they lost the game, besides the fact that they were traveling. The only cause fallacy. So, often complex situations are not the result of a single cause. It's multiple factors that lead to it. So not only is more than one cause probable, it's also true that more than one solution is likely. Some examples. We can stop traffic fatalities if we make every instance of drunk driving punishable with a 20-year prison sentence. So, would that do it? Is that all it would take? No. Another example. The dropout rate for high school students would decrease to almost nothing if classes were smaller. That's a great example of this only cause fallacy. There are many causes, and that may be one of them, but we can't simplify it to a single thing and expect that the complex situation is going to have this result from making one shift. False analogy. So an analogy is basically a comparison between two things. This is like that. So logically used, an analogy would be a comparison that makes a point. A false analogy is a weak or far-fetched comparison. The items being compared are just too dissimilar for that comparison to be effective. Like the manager of a wild animals circus, the principal of a high school is engaged in the business of training animals. There is always the strain of having to keep the animals under control. A school can no more permit students complete freedom than a circus can release its wild animals. In both instances, the public would protest vigorously. Not a good comparison. Next example. Attacking the person, or the ad hominem fallacy. When you attempt to discredit your opponent's views by attacking their character or their circumstance, that's an ad hominem fallacy. So the way to handle it instead is to deal with the argument, not the person. An example. Leanne has proposed a series of reforms in the way the student government is run. Everyone knows that Leanne is never serious about anything. She's always joking and fooling around, so we shouldn't waste our time considering the reforms she's proposed, etc. So it's not about the thing itself, it's about Leanne. So this is an ad hominem attack. The either or fallacy. So this is a reduction of things to a binary, to a right or wrong, an either or, a good or bad. It's an oversimplification. So it ignores all possibilities between these two extremes. If we don't re-elect Governor X, the state government will be ruined. Or either we will have to sell more tickets, or we will have to cancel the play completely. Next fallacy, the non sequitur. Non sequitur means it does not follow in Latin. So when a conclusion simply does not follow what precedes it, that's a non sequitur fallacy. An example. More than 2/3 of the students participate in some extracurricular activity. Because 100% of the student body does not participate in these activities, all of these activities should be canceled. That's one of those that you just sort of sit and think, I don't see the connection there. So that's a non sequitur. Circular reasoning is where you give no distinct reasons to support your claims. You basically just circle back around to the way that it was proposed. Just like rephrasing and restating the position statement. Here's an example. My candidate is the best qualified of all. In character, experience, education, and intellectual ability, she is superior to everyone else who is running for office. No one even remotely approaches her qualifications for the position. She stands head and shoulders above the other candidates. Therefore, she deserves your vote. So there's a clear position, but where are the reasons? Begging the question. Begging the question is when you assume that an opinion or a judgment is correct and true, and that your reader feels the same. An example. Everyone agrees this is an unfair tax. Your reader may or may not agree. We all know the senator's statement is ridiculous. Which again, maybe you're talking to the senator. Maybe the senator disagrees. So that is begging the question. So there it is, a few logical fallacies